Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us and for tuning in to this presentation by the Woodrow Wilson Presidential Library today. My name is Andrew Phillips, and I am the curator here at the Presidential Library. And today we are commemorating the 167th birthday of President Thomas Woodrow Wilson, born right here in Staunton in 1856. I'd like to thank all of the donors out there who make presentations like this and just our normal operations possible. It's almost the end of the year, so if you're feeling generous, we hope you'll go to our website, woodrowwilson.org, and give a little bit. It helps us to present more programs like this in the future. I'd also like to thank our Director of Education, Emily Kilgore, who is behind the scenes and making sure that all of this runs smoothly for us today. And thank you all out there for joining us on Facebook Live. I'd be delighted to take any questions you may have about this topic, and please feel free to type them into the comments window there on Facebook, and I'll do my best to answer all your questions at the end. But today we are discussing a very important event for Staunton in the grand scheme of things, probably not so important for Woodrow Wilson himself, but the day that in 1912 he returned to Staunton for what he did not realize at the time, I suppose, would be his last visit in order to celebrate his 56th birthday as president-elect of the United States. Now, it was on November 5th, 1912, that a small town in Virginia received a great gift. Their native son had been elected president, and the city, which had already been following his career with rapt attention, was overjoyed. It certainly didn't hurt that Woodrow Wilson came from a predominantly Democratic state and was the first Democrat elected president in 20 years. Months earlier, in that fabled time when presidential elections didn't actually begin until the summer of the election year, a train full of Stantonians had even descended on Richmond to hear when then Governor Wilson spoke in that city. This was February of 1912, well before anyone in their right mind would openly admit that they were running for president. Now, Staunton was not alone in laying claim to the new president-elect, and some could argue that their claim was one of the least persuasive. He was born here in 1856, but he and his family had departed just a few months after he had turned 1 year old. He lived in Augusta, Georgia for about a dozen years, and later in Columbia, South Carolina, and Wilmington, North Carolina. He studied in Davidson, North Carolina, in Charlottesville, Virginia, and in Baltimore, Maryland. He practiced law in Atlanta, and he taught in Pennsylvania and Connecticut. And it was in Princeton, New Jersey, that many of these areas of his life came together. He was a student, he was a teacher, he was a university president, and ultimately the governor of that state. All told, he lived almost 30 years in New Jersey, more than half his life before becoming president. Wilson certainly had a number of options when discussing his origins. And throughout the 1912 presidential campaign, many of these locales tried to claim him. The Atlanta Journal endorsed him and his Savannah-born wife, saying, "We are in favor of putting a Georgia family at the head of the nation." One of his aunts, who had an amazing first name, Feliciana Shepherd Baker, wrote to him from Columbia, South Carolina, in the days following the election, saying, "We hope we can persuade you to spend at least a part of your vacation in your old home. You may feel assured of a most hearty welcome from all." This is the home as it stands today in Columbia. Now, at the time, a committee in the city had even come together to purchase this house in the hopes that he would make it his winter White House. Woodrow Wilson was polite when he responded. He said he hoped he could come to stay, and that if he did, he would be given the same room he had when he was a young boy. But he never ultimately took them up on that offer. The house is now preserved as the Museum of the Reconstruction Era, an excellent museum down in South Carolina. In the days after his election, Wilson received invitations similar to this one from all across the country, but there was only one that he would ultimately accept. Now, back in that Richmond speech in February of 1912, he called Staunton his native place. Now, he's a politician, and the words to please the crowd he happens to be in front of may not be the most true. But in a private letter afterward, he did reiterate some of those sentiments. He said, "Since I wrote last, I've been to Virginia, my native land, and they gave me a royal welcome. A special train from Staunton, my birthplace, brought some 200 or 300 men down with a local band, some 140 miles to greet me and cheer for me in Richmond." After his election in November, he remembered that train and Stanton's early support. And in December, he accepted the invitation to celebrate his 56th birthday in the place where he was born. Now, downtown Staunton, particularly our main street, which is called Beverly Street, hasn't changed all that much in the past century or so. Here we see a view as it exists today and how the city appeared preparing for that 1912 celebration. The city pulled out all the stops to celebrate Wilson's homecoming, draping the streets of downtown with bunting and stringing electric lights from purpose-built pillars. They had quite a bit of time to prepare, for sure. So you can see that the pillars are also serving double duty. This is his birthday lies just a few days after Christmas, and so they are festooned with wreaths and garlands at the same time. And here we see another view with more of those pillars from the top of Gospel Hill, actually just next door to the Woodrow Wilson Museum, looking down Beverly Street towards downtown, strung with electric lights here in the daytime, as that same hill appears today, and how it appeared at night. Quite a striking scene in 1912. Now, Woodrow Wilson arrived by train with his wife, Ellen Axon Wilson, on the evening of December the 27th. So 166 years ago last night from the day that he was born. Here we see as it appeared in the Richmond paper. They traveled from their home in Princeton, New Jersey. They crossed the Potomac at Alexandria and were greeted by large bonfires, which were set to welcome them. The bonfires continued all along the route, down through Richmond, then west past Charlottesville, crossing the Blue Ridge Mountains through the Crozet Railroad Tunnel. The trip was big news, and not just in Staunton, but in the entire state of Virginia. Virginia, sometimes called the mother of presidents, gained its 8th native son president in this election, the first, of course, being George Washington. Now, Woodrow and Ellen's train pulls into the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad Depot in Staunton. Here is at the train station, as it appears today, still an active Amtrak station, and how it appeared in the 19-teens. Because they arrived at about 8:30 in the evening, there are no real good pictures of his first arrival back at home. But by all accounts, Woodrow and Ellen were quite tired, in fact, not feeling especially well following their trip, and took a carriage straight from the station to their accommodations for the night, with just a few waves to the crowd that had gathered to greet them. Now, the room arranged for the Wilsons during their stay was not in one of the many fine hotels in town, but was in the home in which he was born 56 years before, the manse of the Presbyterian Church. The current minister, Abel McIver Fraser, had done quite a bit of work to prepare the home for his distinguished guests. Preparing an upstairs room for them, which had once been Woodrow Wilson's father's study when he had lived there in 1856. Looking at this photo of the manse as it appeared around this time, the front window, sort of right in the center of the frame, that is the window of the study turned bedroom. They wanted to make sure that there were presidential level accommodations for the president-elect and first lady-to-be. And so this is how the room appeared in the 19-teens, prepared for the Wilsons' arrival. And here is how it appears today. We're very grateful to the descendants of Reverend Fraser for the donation of the bed, cane seat chair, and padded chair that all had been in the room during that 1912 visit. Now, the Wilsons spent the night, by all accounts, a very comfortable evening in this room, and the next morning felt refreshed and began their day with a small breakfast reception on the first floor of the manse. The reception included only a few prominent guests. They tried to keep it fairly small, including Staunton Mayor Hampton Wyatt and Governor of Virginia William Mann. Governor Mann here is in the center with the top hat. He is notable as the last Confederate soldier to serve as a governor of Virginia. Wilson ultimately exited the manse at about 11:45 in the morning and was greeted by the large crowd waiting outside. Here we see him waving to the crowd, having stepped right out of the house, as well with Governor Mann having just taken off his own hat. Wilson left from the manse and to go to a viewing stand downtown to watch a grand parade that had been prepared in his honor. Here we see him hopping into the carriage with the governor and many, many other people in attendance, preparing to whisk them down the hill towards downtown. And here we have Woodrow, Ellen, Governor Mann, and his wife, along with several other dignitaries in the viewing stand there along Beverly Street. There were somewhere between 20 and 25,000 people in attendance for these events, the population of the city back then being only about 10,000. Here we see the parade around the corner of Beverly and Central Street here in downtown Staunton. After the parade, which included cadets from the military academies in the area, these are some U.S. cavalrymen who were part of the procession, as well as bands and schools and all sorts of other dignitaries there to greet them. After the parade finished, he was taken just about a few blocks away to what is now known as the Mary Baldwin University Administration Building, but which was then part of what was then called Mary Baldwin Seminary. He arrived on Frederick Street at the Mary Baldwin entrance, directly across from the First Presbyterian Church of Staunton, the same congregation that had been his father's back in the 1850s. I have to imagine that this person taking the photograph was perched somewhere either on top of or in a high window of the church looking down. The speech given across the street here on the portico of that Mary Baldwin building was attended by as many people as could fit around that small space. In the speech, Wilson reminisced about his time in Staunton, saying, "I have no vivid recollection of the first 2 years that I spent in Staunton, but I have some vivid recollections of subsequent years when I was permitted to visit this, my birthplace. For I have visited here a number of times when you paid me no attention whatever. I cannot fail to recall the embarrassment upon which on one occasion I stood in the place where I am now standing, when I was a student of law at the University at Charlottesville. I had the very singular good fortune of having 5 cousins studying at this seminary. I was very fond of those cousins. I paid them many attentions, and there were numbers of my conferees at the university who accompanied me, out of courtesy, upon my visits. On one occasion, when I brought a somewhat numerous company of friends to the spot upon which I am now standing, I remember the great embarrassment with which I submitted to the cross-examination which preceded my entrance at these portals. I have, therefore, not always been welcomed to this spot with open arms." To summarize that story, he brought his male friends to the all-women's school and tried to sneak in, but was thwarted by those who understood what he was there for, ultimately. He also does not mention that one of those five cousins was one he devoted quite a bit of attention to, a woman named Hattie Woodrow, his first cousin, who he proposed to in marriage. She said no, and he ultimately went on to marry someone who was not at all related to him. The story he also didn't tell as a part of this is how, when he tried to gain admittance, he did so by claiming to be delivering the good wishes of his mother to her old friend Mary Julia Baldwin. The two were, of course, very good friends, and Mary Baldwin was the head of the school at the time, and after whom the school would be named in 1895. Those barring him entrance saw through that as well. Woodrow Wilson spoke again that evening at the neighboring Staunton Military Academy, the buildings and grounds of which are now also a part of the Mary Baldwin University campus. For those who managed to attend both events, Wilson was kind enough to not repeat himself from the afternoon, but many of the themes were the same. Afterwards, he was served a fine French-inspired dinner, including a chiffonade salad, consommé royal, lamb, and terrapin a la Baltimore turtle soup. That night, he and Ellen spent another night in the manse, and the next morning they returned to the train station to head back to Princeton, New Jersey. Woodrow there on the left, shaking hands with someone, with Secret Servicemen flanking him and his wife, Ellen. Now, Wilson's visit was a whirlwind, and both it and his speeches were discussed in depth by the press, including a number of the local papers. The Harrisonburg newspaper, the Rockingham Daily Record, just about nowadays, just about half an hour drive north of Staunton, included the headline, "Staunton honors distinguished son, President-elect Wilson, giving mammoth demonstration at place of his birth." The Richmond Times-Dispatch proclaimed, "Staunton rejoices in homecoming of its most distinguished son, state prouder than ever of its illustrious son." Though perhaps my favorite of these local articles about Woodrow Wilson's visit comes from Highland County. Highland just to the west of Staunton and Augusta County. A very rural and mountainous place. The entire county in 1912 had a population of about 5,000 people, and their newspaper came out just once a week and not always every week. In the first edition that came out following Wilson's birthday, that on January 5th of 1913, they stated, "The Wilson Jubilee at Staunton last Saturday was a big success, and the little valley city did herself proud. The fact that she had undertaken a demonstration rather too large and pretentious for her size and class seemed to act as a stimulus to her pride and ambition, and she covered herself with glory. No doubt many more Highlanders would have been there but for the prevalence of one of those local high-altitude storms on Friday. As it was, 3 or 4 cars went out, and among those attending were..." And the newspaper then proceeds to list the name of all of the people from Highland County who were able to make the trip, ending with Grace Heiner and her brother Dewey. Now, Highland County residents were not the only ones who made the trip to come and see Woodrow Wilson and this parade. Carter Glass had come to talk with Woodrow Wilson about banking, but he never got the chance. Glass was not just an ordinary attendee. He was coming from Lynchburg and represented Staunton in the United States Congress. In a letter dated December 29th, so just the day after the birthday, 1912, he wrote, "I am just back from the Wilson celebration at Staunton and am literally worn to a frazzle. I had hoped that I might get, perhaps, an hour with Mr. Wilson on currency matters, but it was plain to be seen that every moment of his time was taken up with parade and reception." I'm sure Carter Glass was not the only person hoping that this would be the opportunity to bend the ear of the president-elect. Now, Wilson was deeply touched by the incredible show that had been put on for him. And he would write numerous letters over the next month to thank Stanton and her leaders for their hospitality. This included one to his host, Reverend Fraser, who I should also mention had been a classmate of Woodrow Wilson's for the brief time that Wilson attended Davidson College in North Carolina. And on January 3rd, 1913, Woodrow Wilson wrote to Reverend Fraser saying, "We have settled again to our normal routine at home, but it will be a long, long time before we lose the vivid impression of the pleasure we had in visiting you at Staunton. Your hospitality was of the truest, most generous, and thoughtful sort, and we shall always be grateful to you for it and count ourselves among your friends and admirers. I wish there was some other way besides words in which I could express the real debt I feel under to you. Mrs. Wilson is herself going to write to Mrs. Fraser, but I wanted to give myself the pleasure of sending to Mrs. Fraser and you and the young people of your household this warm expression of my deep appreciation." As I mentioned at the top, this was not known, obviously, at the time, but this would be the last of time that Woodrow Wilson would visit the place of his birth. He would pass through the area on a couple of occasions, most notably in December of 1915, when he and his second wife, Edith, traveled to the homestead down in Bath County for their honeymoon. His first wife, Ellen, having died in the White House in the summer of 1914. But while he may have waved out the window of the train as they passed through, Stanton would never again have the opportunity to really celebrate him in person. The trip was a momentous occasion for Stanton, and many years later was remembered fondly by those involved. Lots of local families, and this has really truly proved a boon to the Woodrow Wilson Presidential Library, maintained the newspapers and ribbons and buttons and even some of the bunting from that celebration. And many have been very kind and generous enough to donate those to the Presidential Library. After Wilson's death in February of 1924, residents of the city began working to preserve his birthplace. And in the 1930s, his widow, Edith, would really join in their efforts. This would ultimately create what would one day become the Woodrow Wilson Presidential Library, beginning with the preservation of the home in which Wilson in this photograph is standing in front of, that birthplace house where he was born in 1856, slept again in 1912, and which today continues to discuss the complex legacy and life and times of this president of the United States. Thank you, everybody, so much for your kind attention. I see we have a couple of questions, and I will do my best to answer them. Did Stanton vote for Wilson in both elections? Yes. In 1912 and in 1916, Woodrow Wilson received votes from Stanton. Won Virginia in both of those contests as well. Important to note, this is at a time when the southern states, especially the former Confederate states, had been very, very strongly Democratic, helped in no small part by the fact that the vast majority of African Americans broadly in the state, in Virginia, broadly in the South, but in Virginia as well, were also largely barred from voting due to Jim Crow laws. There was a significant African American population community here in Staunton, besides one or two options, one or two exemptions. Very few of them were asked what their opinions of Woodrow Wilson's visit was. Had anything been named for Wilson before his visit? I can say that there are a lot of things in the area named after Woodrow Wilson. I'm not sure how many were named right before his visit, or in the I'll say it this way, in the accounts of that day and a half-ish that he spent here in Staunton in 1912, I don't believe there were any formal ceremonies naming a street after him. But nowadays, there is a high school in the city. There are numerous streets named after as Wilson or Woodrow Wilson or Woodrow. Um, uh, Honestly, there should be an Ellen Wilson out here in town somewhere. If there isn't one, there should be. But there are a number of things named after him, though I don't believe any were named after him by the time of his visit. Have there been any other famous politicians who visited the birthplace? There have been quite a few. A couple of presidents have visited. In 1941, in May of that year, President Franklin Roosevelt travels to Staunton, largely on the urging of the widow Edith Wilson, who lives until 1961. She is a powerful force and quite outlives her husband by quite a bit. He comes here in May of 1941 to dedicate the Woodrow Wilson birthplace home. Back then, in our early years, we were a shrine, and he dedicates it as a new shrine to freedom, meant to celebrate and revel in the accomplishments of Woodrow Wilson. Nowadays, we look at him as a more complex figure. We try to talk about things he did that some people think are good, things he did that more than some think are bad. We want to talk about him warts and all. So our mission has changed quite a bit over the years, but Franklin Roosevelt was one who really helped to formally establish this place, again, largely at the urging of women like Edith Wilson. Dwight Eisenhower, while President of the United States, also visited. And we have hosted a number of other politicians and shall we say, celebrities, from Lady Bird Johnson to various international ambassadors. And in one of my favorite stories, when she was married to John Warner, Elizabeth Taylor also visited here. By the accounts of that visit, she was fairly bored. But we know that if anybody else feels like visiting us, that you will not be as bored as Elizabeth Taylor. Looks like I don't have any other questions, so I just want to say thank you so much once again for joining me for today's program. I hope we'll see you either online or in person sometime in the new year. My apologies, I do have one more question. Besides newspapers, where can we see other items from the visit? We have quite a few on display in our museum. Some of the pennants, buttons and ribbons and things, as well as a very beautiful set of miniature portraits done of Woodrow Wilson's mother and father by a local artist that were presented to him on the occasion of his visit. We have also, again, as I mentioned them before, but the descendants of Reverend Fraser have also been very kind to donate not just furniture, but letters and photographs and other things from that time. So not only can we interpret the history of this particular couple of days for Woodrow Wilson and for the house, but the broader history of all the different families who have lived in the home. The Wilson family are only here for a couple of years, from 1855 to early 1858. They are certainly not the only people who contributed to the history of Staunton, of this home that just happens to have a president born in it. And so they have been a great resource as well. Some of those items are available online on our website, woodrowwilson.org, or you can see them as well in our archival website, which is it's presidentwilson.org. Those are transcribed and searchable, and you can see some of those documents and photographs from that period. For real now, it looks like I am done with questions. So once again, thank you so much for joining me for the program. I hope to see you in person here in Staunton or online again in the future. I hope everyone continues to enjoy their holidays and to have a very happy new year. Thank you so much. Goodbye.